All right, today we are diving into a massive showdown that's pitting the White House directly against the most powerful financial institution on the planet. We're talking a criminal investigation, we're talking accusations of political intimidation, and we're going to break down what it all could mean for the U.S. economy and, well, for you.
So let's just start with the bombshell, right? The U.S. Federal Reserve, the independent central bank that basically controls the nation's money, and its chair, Jerome Powell, are under a criminal investigation by the Justice Department. And let me just say, this is almost unheard of.
And that gets us right to the heart of this whole drama. Is this a legitimate look into taxpayer money being wasted? Or is this a very calculated move by the Trump administration to get a grip on the country's monetary policy? Let's unpack it.
Okay, so first things first. Let's look at the investigation itself. What exactly is the Justice Department digging into here?
The details are pretty serious. We're talking grand jury subpoenas have been served. A criminal investigation is officially open, and it's zeroed in on potential taxpayer abuse. But really, it all boils down to one very pointed question. Did the head of the Fed, Jerome Powell, lie to Congress about a massive renovation project?
And this is where it gets really interesting. Because depending on who you listen to, you get two completely different stories about why this investigation is even happening in the first place.
The official story, the one from the administration, it all centers on this number. See, the Fed's headquarters is getting a $2.5 billion facelift, and now it's projected to be $700 million over budget. That is a huge overage, and that's the official justification for this whole investigation.
And to really give you a sense of the administration's view on this, the director of the Office of Management and Budget compared the project to, and I quote, the building of the Palace of Versailles in France. He called the costs outrageous, pointing to things like VIP elevators and rooftop gardens as proof of some seriously lavish spending. But then you have the other side of the coin. Fed Chair Powell, who, by the way, usually stays totally silent on political attacks, he came out with this really forceful, really striking public response. He's basically saying this has nothing to do with marble floors.
In his own words, Powell is claiming that this threat of criminal charges is a direct result of the Fed doing its job, setting interest rates based on the economy, not based on the president's public demands for rate cuts. So he's framing this as political intimidation, plain and simple.
So you see, you have these two totally competing narratives. The official line is all about fiscal accountability, about protecting taxpayer money. But the story coming straight from the Fed is that this is really about undermining their independence to get control over interest rates before an election.
And the drama did not stop with Powell's statement. Oh no. In a move that is just extraordinary, the old guard of the Federal Reserve, they decided they needed to weigh in.
Just think about the sheer weight of these names for a second. Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan. We're talking every single living former Fed chair. They all signed a joint statement, and they just blasted what they called an unprecedented attempt to undermine the Fed's independence. I mean, this just doesn't happen.
And this one line from their statement, it is absolutely devastating. They're saying that this kind of political pressure is what you see in developing countries with, weak, unstable economies, and that it leads to absolute disaster. It's a direct shot at the credibility of America's own economic institutions.
Okay, so this is some fascinating DC insider drama, for sure. But why should you actually care? Well, because this fight over the Fed's independence could have some very real consequences for the market and for your money. The whole fight really boils down to this one core concept: Fed independence. The idea is simple. The people who control interest rates should be kept away from politicians, right? Because politicians might be tempted to, juice the economy for a short-term boost right before an election without worrying about the long-term pain that comes from inflation.
And you better believe traders are taking notice. Analysts over at Goldman Sachs are already predicting that if the Fed is seen as losing its independence, it could lead to some pretty big shifts. Higher long-term treasury yields, higher gold prices, and a weaker U.S. dollar, all because global confidence in the country's financial stability could start to slip.
The team at Bloomberg Economics, they laid out this danger just perfectly. If politicians start setting monetary policy, the temptation is always to make things look really good right before an election. You get that short-term boost, but you pay for it later, big time, with soaring inflation and a painful economic correction. And in that world, everybody loses.
But with all this high drama, you gotta ask a pretty critical question. In the grand scheme of things, how much do these new developments, how much do they actually matter for the markets and for the economy right now?
Well, to really assess the impact, let's just look at the calendar. The investigation was just revealed, but Jerome Powell's term as the chair is already scheduled to end in May of 2026, which is just a few months before those critical midterm elections.
And this brings up a really strong counterargument. I mean, we already knew Powell was on his way out, right? We already knew the president wants lower interest rates and is probably going to pick a replacement who feels the same way. So does all this public fighting and this criminal investigation, does it actually change the final outcome? So far, the direct market reaction has been pretty quiet.
Which brings us to our final, lingering question. Even after his term as chair is over, Powell has the option to stay on the Fed's board as a voting governor. Now, the administration will almost certainly want him gone completely, but after this huge public battle, you have to wonder, could he stick around just to make a point? And what would that mean for the future of the Fed?